He found her alone, struggling to breathe. Inhaler empty. 8 months pregnant. He was just a factory worker. He had no reason to stop. His foreman told him to keep walking. He didn't. He handed her his own inhaler, and 2 days later, he was written up for it. What Ryan had no idea was that the woman gasping for breath in that corridor, she owned the entire company. And she remembered exactly who helped her, and exactly who punished him for it. There is a kind of man the world has decided does not matter. Not because he is lazy. Not because he lacks talent. But because the place he was born, the family he came from, and the system he grew up inside never made room for him to be anything more than useful. He is the man who shows up before the sun, clocks out after it sets, and in between those 2 moments, gives everything he has to a machine, a factory floor, a shift that does not know his name. Ryan Cole was that kind of man. He worked the morning shift at Meridian Packaging Solutions, a mid-sized industrial facility just outside Columbus, Ohio. The building was loud, grey, and smelled of rubber, oil, and the particular staleness that settles into a place where people spend too many hours of their lives. It wasn't a fancy place. Honestly, it was the kind of place where people didn't even talk about dreams. Ryan was 31. His younger brother was still in high school. His mom had a bad knee and terrible insurance. Ryan rented a small room in a house with 2 guys he hardly talked to. His bank account emptied as fast as it filled. His phone had a cracked corner. Lunch was whatever his mom packed the night before, usually a sandwich and something wrapped in foil she wouldn't let him turn down. Ryan didn't complain. That's just who he was. Life wasn't easy, but he handled it. At work people liked him because he didn't cause problems. The supervisors kept him around because he was simple to deal with. And his foreman, Gerald Walsh, a thick-necked guy, saw him the way someone sees a solid tool. Dependable. Useful. Not someone you think much about beyond that. Ryan's job was quality control on the packaging line. He checked seals, measured tolerances, flagged defects, and reported anomalies up the chain. It was detail work in a loud place, which meant he had learned to hold concentration the way other men held their breath, steady, patient, for longer than seemed possible. He had a dream, though. Not a loud dream. Not the kind he talked about. But at night, when the house was quiet and his roommates were asleep, Ryan would open his laptop and study engineering. He had enrolled in an online program at Columbus State 2 years ago, 1 class at a time, paying as he went because loans felt like a trap he could not afford to spring. He was slow-tracking his degree because life kept interrupting. But he had not stopped. That was the most important thing about Ryan Cole. He had not stopped. The morning it happened was a Tuesday in late October. The factory floor was running at full capacity. The machines were loud and rhythmic, churning out packaging at a pace that left no room for distraction. Ryan was at his station near the center line, clipboard in hand, marking off inspection points with the quiet efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He noticed her before most people did. She was standing near the visitor entrance at the far end of the floor, a woman who did not belong there, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she looked like someone the building had not been expecting. She wore a fitted blazer over a maternity dress, professional but clearly modified for late pregnancy. Her dark hair was tied back. She had a leather folder tucked against her chest and glanced around the factory, taking it all in like she was used to checking places out. Ryan watched her for a moment. She was clearly pregnant, far along, from the look of it. She had a small earpiece in, like she had just ended a phone call, and she was speaking to a man in a hard hat who Ryan recognized as one of the facility managers, a fellow named Dale Hutchins. Dale wore the nervous energy of a man trying to impress someone he had not expected to show up. A woman this clearly pregnant, standing in the middle of a loud industrial floor, Ryan noticed because he was trained to notice things that seemed slightly out of place. He went back to his clipboard. About 20 minutes later, he saw her again. She had moved toward the east corridor, near the quality testing bays. Dale was no longer with her. She was walking slowly, one hand on the wall as though steadying herself. Her face had changed. Whatever calm composure she had carried in was starting to strain at the edges. Ryan set his clipboard down. He was not supposed to leave his station without logging out. Gerald Walsh had made that very clear on multiple occasions. Stay in your zone. Mind the line. Keep the count accurate. But Ryan Cole had grown up watching his mother work through pain because she could not afford to stop, and he recognized the particular way a person moved when they were trying not to let their body betray them in public. He walked toward her. She had stopped near a support pillar, one hand pressed flat against it. Her breathing was audible now, controlled, deliberate, the kind of breathing you do when you are managing something rather than just existing. Then he saw it. Her hand went to her pocket. She pulled out an inhaler. She pressed it to her lips and inhaled, and nothing happened. She tried again. Shook it. Tried a third time. The inhaler was empty. Her eyes found his. They were dark brown, sharp even now, and they carried a flash of something, not fear exactly, but the acknowledgement that her situation had just become more serious. Ryan did not think. He reached into his own breast pocket and pulled out his emergency inhaler. He carried one for mild exercise-induced asthma, used it rarely, always had it on him, and held it out. It's albuterol, he said. 2 puffs. Same as most standard inhalers. She looked at it. Then at him. Then she took it. She used it properly, unhurried, 2 slow inhalations, waited. Ryan counted silently. After 30 seconds, some of the tension left her shoulders. Thank you, she said. Her voice was low and even. The voice of someone used to being in control. Are you okay? He asked. I will be. She handed the inhaler back. She straightened a little. I've got exercise-induced asthma. The walk from the parking garage was longer than I thought. My inhaler ran out yesterday and I forgot to get a new one. That happens, he said, not sounding like he was judging her. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way people rarely look at men who wear factory uniforms. What's your name? Ryan, he said. Ryan Cole. Quality control, line 3. Keenan Marsh, she said. She said it simply, the way you say your name when you are not expecting it to mean anything to the other person. Ryan nodded politely and it did not mean anything to him at the time. He did not know the name. He would. At that moment, Gerald Walsh appeared at the end of the corridor, face hard. Cole, he called out. What are you doing off your station? Ryan turned. Sir, she needed. I don't care what she needed. You're on line 3. Get back. Keenan turned toward Walsh, her expression unreadable. Walsh glanced at her briefly, saw a pregnant woman, shifted into an uncomfortable sort of neutrality, and then looked back at Ryan. Now, he said. Ryan looked at Keenan once. She gave the smallest nod, as if to say, I'm fine. Go. He went. Walsh followed him back to the station. What were you thinking, leaving your post for some visitor? He kept his voice low but his irritation was plain. You get written up for an unlogged station departure. Ryan said nothing because there was nothing to say that would matter. He had done what he had done. He picked up his clipboard and returned to his counts. Walsh walked away, already composing the incident report in his head. Ryan watched the numbers on the line and thought of nothing except the woman's breathing and whether it had steadied. The write-up came 2 days later. Not a termination notice, Ryan had a clean record and Walsh knew better than to push too far, but a formal warning. Unlogged station departure. Disregard for floor protocols. It went in his file. His shift supervisor, a weary man named Tom Baylor, handed it over with the resigned expression of someone who disagreed with the decision but lacked the energy to fight it. I'm sorry, Ryan. Walsh pushed it through. Ryan signed the paper and folded it. That evening he sat in the kitchen of the shared house after his roommates had gone to bed and opened his laptop. He had a midterm in his engineering mechanics course due in 4 days. He had also received a text from his mother that afternoon. Her knee had gotten worse, the doctor wanted an MRI, and her insurance had denied the first referral. He sat with that for a while. The math of his life was not complicated. It was just relentless. He made $18 an hour. After taxes, rent, his share of utilities, groceries, and the monthly payment he sent to his mother, he had between $300 and $400 left each month. The online course cost $250 per semester. That left $150 of actual margin. Not savings. Margin. His brother Marcus was 16 and wanted to study architecture. Lately he'd been talking about college applications. Ryan kept doing the math in his head, trying to see what might actually work, and trying not to kill the excitement in Marcus's voice. So Ryan did what he always did when things felt heavy. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his textbook, and studied. 3 days after the write-up, something unexpected happened at the factory. Ryan was at his station during the afternoon shift when one of the machines on line 2 started making a bad seal. It was a tiny gap in the packaging. The scanners probably wouldn't catch it, but he did. He flagged it. The usual steps were simple: log the issue, tag the boxes, tell the line supervisor, then get back to work. But Ryan had seen this before. Same kind of defect. 2 months earlier, different machine. He knew the pattern. A worn tension roller. If nobody fixed it, the problem would spread through the next shift and ruin a much bigger batch. So he wrote a full report. Cause, details, suggested time for maintenance. Then he sent it to Tom Baylor and the maintenance supervisor. He copied Walsh too. Just routine. Walsh didn't respond. The maintenance team fixed the roller. The larger defect was avoided. No one said anything to Ryan. That was how it worked in places like Meridian. The man at the bottom did his work well. The work got done. No one measured the gap between what was expected and what was given. But Ryan Cole kept giving it. Not because he expected reward. Because something in him believed, without much evidence but with stubborn conviction, that doing things well was the only way he could respect himself. Exactly 2 weeks after the morning in the corridor, a black sedan arrived at the Meridian facility. It was not the kind of car that usually came here. The factory's parking lot knew pickup trucks, used Civics, the occasional company fleet vehicle. This car was quiet and expensive, and it parked in the visitor section with a certainty that suggested its owner had confirmed a meeting. 2 people stepped out. A man in his 40s in a dark suit carrying a slim briefcase, and a woman who Ryan recognized immediately. Keenan Marsh. She was dressed differently than before, this time in a structured coat over a deep blue dress, professional and composed, her pregnancy still obvious but her presence somehow larger than it had been in the factory corridor. She walked toward the front office with the unhurried confidence of someone who had called ahead. Ryan saw this from the window of the break room during his 10-minute rest. He watched her disappear through the front entrance and said nothing to anyone. 20 minutes later, Tom Baylor appeared at line 3 with an expression Ryan had never seen on him before. Ryan. Walsh wants to see you. Upstairs. Ryan set down his clipboard. Now. Now. The upstairs office was a small conference room adjacent to the facility director's suite. Ryan had been there once, during onboarding. He knocked on the door, entered. Gerald Walsh was standing to one side of the table, arms crossed, wearing an expression that Ryan could not immediately decode. It sat somewhere between uncomfortable and carefully controlled. The facility director, a man named James Okonkwo who Ryan had spoken to perhaps twice in 3 years, sat at the head of the table with a stillness that suggested he was choosing his posture carefully. And at the side of the table sat Keenan Marsh. She looked at Ryan when he entered. Her eyes were steady. She nodded once, in the way of someone who had been waiting. James Okonkwo spoke first. Ryan, thank you for coming up. Please sit down. Ryan Saturday. Okonkwo cleared his throat. We've had a conversation this morning with Ms. Marsh. She asked to speak with us directly. And she asked for you specifically to be present. Ryan glanced at Keenan. She was watching him without expression. Walsh shifted his weight near the wall. Okonkwo continued. Ms. Marsh is the Chief Executive Officer of Hartwell Capital Group. He paused as if the name was supposed to land with weight, and it did, not with Ryan immediately, but with Walsh, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Hartwell Capital Group is the majority stakeholder in our parent company, Meridian Industrial Holdings. The room was quiet for a moment. Ryan understood now. He was not sure of all the implications, but he understood the architecture of it. This woman was not a random visitor. She held a position above the people in this room in a way that made all the professional distance in the world feel very thin. Keenan Marsh spoke. Her voice was the same as he remembered, level, clear, precise. 2 weeks ago, I visited this facility as part of a portfolio review. I had a medical episode in the East Corridor. Mr. Cole assisted me when he noticed I was in difficulty. He gave me his personal inhaler because mine had failed. She paused. Immediately afterward, he was written up for leaving his station. Walsh opened his mouth. Keenan's eyes moved to him, and whatever Walsh was about to say chose not to come out. I want to be clear about why I'm here, Keenan said, turning back to Okonkwo. I'm not here to interfere in facility management. I'm here because how a company treats its people in unscripted moments tells you more about its culture than any policy document. And what I saw was a worker being penalized for a basic act of human decency. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I'd like to understand how that happened. Okonkwo looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at the table. The silence stretched. Ryan sat very still and thought about the write-up sitting in his file and the MRI his mother needed and his brother's college applications and the engineering mechanics midterm he had submitted 4 days ago with 2 hours of sleep. After Walsh left the room, dismissed, not gently, Okonkwo made a brief speech about company values that everyone present understood was being made for the record rather than from the heart. Then he too excused himself, saying something about needing to consult with HR. Ryan and Keenan were alone in the small conference room. She looked at him directly. I want to apologize, she said. I should have said something before I left that day. I should have found out what happened. Ryan shook his head. You didn't know. I had a feeling, she said. That's why I'm here. He looked at her. There was something in her face that he recognized without being able to name, the particular tiredness of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a long time without showing it. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded. That day. You came in alone. You walked from the parking structure alone. Why didn't someone come with you? Keenan was quiet for a moment. Then she said, because I didn't want to need someone with me. I've been running Hartwell Capital for 3 years. I've been in rooms where the first thing people see is my age, or my gender, or now my pregnancy, and they immediately begin calculating how much less seriously they can take me. Her voice was even, but not empty. There was something underneath it. I've had to walk into every room like I don't need help. Even when I do. Ryan nodded slowly. He understood that kind of walking. The walking that looks like confidence but is actually a daily calculation. That day, she continued, I had just come from a board meeting in the city. One of our directors, a man who has been trying to push me out since I took over from my father, had filed a motion to have me placed on a voluntary leave of absence due to my condition. His word. The air quotes were small and dry. I had 2 more site reviews after Meridian. I was not going to cancel them. What happened with the motion? Ryan asked. It failed. Her face stayed calm. No victory in it. Just steady. I was ready for it. I've been getting ready for every version of that fight for 3 years. My dad started Hartwell Capital as a small consulting business and turned it into a $40 billion company. When he died, he believed I could take care of it. I planned to prove he was right. Ryan sat with that. Then she asked, "Tell me about yourself, Ryan Cole." He almost brushed the question off. He was used to staying in the background at work. But the way she asked it made him stop. So he answered. Not the cleaned-up version he usually gave his bosses. The real one. The online classes. The engineering program he was trying to finish. The way he helped his family with money. The write-up at work. How he kept doing the job right even when nobody noticed, because quitting or doing it badly never felt like a real option. Keenan listened without looking at her phone. Without shifting. Without performing attentiveness. She simply listened the way that people who are genuinely good at their work tend to listen, like the information matters. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You identified a tensioning defect 2 weeks ago," she said. Ryan blinked. "Yes." The maintenance supervisor included it in the facility report. "James mentioned it when I reviewed the materials before coming today." She tilted her head slightly. "You filed it with cause analysis and a recommended maintenance window. That's not a quality control requirement. That's engineering judgment." Ryan said nothing. "How long have you been studying?" 2 years. Part-time. "How long until you finish?" He calculated quickly. 2.5 more years at my current pace. Maybe less if I can take a second course per semester. Keenan Marsh looked at him steadily. Then she said something that Ryan would remember for the rest of his life, not because of what it changed, but because of what it confirmed. "The reason people like Walsh write up people like you," she said quietly, "is not because you broke a rule. It's because you reminded him that the rules exist for people, not the other way around. And that's a threatening thing for a man whose only power is the rules." Ryan did not think about that meeting in the way of a man expecting something. He drove home that evening and told no one. He sat at the kitchen table, opened his laptop, and discovered he had received a grade on his midterm, 91%. He allowed himself 30 seconds of quiet satisfaction, then started on the next module. He was not the kind of man who waited for life to deliver things. He had learned very young that waiting was a luxury, and luxuries were for people whose floor was higher than his. But he also could not entirely pretend that the meeting had left no mark on him. Something had shifted, not his circumstances, not yet, but something inside the way he understood his own situation. A woman who ran a $40 billion investment portfolio had sat in a small conference room and listened to him the way that people almost never listened. Not to assess him. Not to find where he fit. Just to understand who he actually was. He did not know what to do with that. The next morning at work, things had changed in a way that was obvious without being announced. Walsh was quiet. Quieter than Ryan had ever seen him, not sullen, just careful. The write-up was not mentioned again. Tom Baylor handed Ryan his weekly schedule with an expression that suggested he had been briefed on something but was not at liberty to say what. Ryan did his job. He checked his seals. He measured his tolerances. He flagged his defects. On Thursday, a woman from HR appeared at the facility and spent the day in a closed conference room. Ryan was called in briefly, asked several careful questions about his experiences on the floor, and thanked for his time. He answered honestly without embellishment. On Friday afternoon, as the shift ended and workers streamed out into the parking lot, Tom Baylor caught Ryan at his locker. "Heads up," Tom said quietly. "Walsh is being reassigned. Effective next week." He paused. "Also, and I'm only telling you this so you hear it from someone who doesn't have an agenda, your file is being reviewed. The write-up is being removed." Ryan looked at him. "I don't know what you said or did," Tom said. "But whatever it was, well done." Ryan drove home in the October evening, the city spreading out under an orange sky, and thought about his mother's MRI and his brother's college applications and the 2.5 years left in his engineering program. He thought about Keenan Marsh walking into a room full of men trying to push her out of her own company and standing there, steady as a load-bearing wall. He thought about the inhaler, the small, ordinary object he had always carried without thinking much about it, and the chain of events that had followed from simply handing it over. He did not think of himself as someone who had done something remarkable. He had done what was obvious and human and decent. But he was beginning to understand that in the world as it actually operated, obvious and human and decent were not always the same as common. 3 weeks passed. Ryan's mother's insurance approved the MRI on the second appeal. The result came back, a manageable condition, treatable without surgery, requiring physical therapy twice a week and a medication adjustment. Not the news he had feared. He exhaled for the first time in months. Marcus was working on his college applications. Ryan sat with him on 2 evenings, reading drafts, asking questions, quietly marveling at his brother's ability to articulate things Ryan had never found words for. At Meridian, someone new took over Walsh's shift. A younger supervisor. Calm. Had a background in lean manufacturing. During his first week, he asked Ryan if those defect reports he'd been writing could turn into a monthly process. Ryan said sure. Things kept moving like usual. Money was still tight. Hours were still long. But something felt different. Lighter. Walsh used to bring this pressure with him every day. The kind of guy who made people feel small just because he could. Ryan didn't realize how much that drained him until the guy was gone. Then, on a Wednesday evening, his phone rang. An unknown number with a Columbus area code. He almost let it go to voicemail, then didn't. Ryan Cole. A woman's voice. Professional, direct. Speaking. This is Dana Elliott. I'm the Director of Talent and Development at Hartwell Capital Group. I'm calling on behalf of Keenan Marsh. A brief pause. Do you have a few minutes to speak? Ryan sat down. Dana Elliott explained, in the careful language of HR professionals, that Hartwell Capital Group was piloting a new program, a workforce development initiative embedded within their portfolio companies, designed to identify high-potential employees in operational roles and provide them with accelerated pathways to technical and managerial advancement. The pilot was launching with 4 participants. Keenan Marsh had personally recommended Ryan's name. The program included full tuition support for completion of his engineering degree. A structured mentorship track. A role transition over 18 months from quality control into a junior operations analyst position at Hartwell's portfolio oversight division. Full benefits, including health coverage that extended to immediate family. Ryan held the phone against his ear and said nothing for a moment. Mr. Cole. I'm here, he said. I'm sorry. Give me a second. He looked around his kitchen. The laminate table he did his coursework on. The cracked phone screen propped against his textbook. The foil-wrapped sandwich his mother had sent him in a bag with a note that said don't skip lunch. Why, he said. I mean, I understand the program. I'm asking why me? Dana Elliott paused, and he had the sense she was reading from something or perhaps choosing not to. Ms. Marsh asked me to tell you that she has been in a lot of rooms with a lot of very expensive people, Dana said. And that the most important thing she has learned in 3 years running her father's company is that the people who do what is right when no one is watching, and when it costs them, are exactly the people she wants in every room. Ryan pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. She also said, Dana continued, and her voice was slightly warmer now, that you remind her of the person her father used to say built things that lasted. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then he said, I'll do it. Keenan Marsh's daughter was born healthy on a Thursday in November. Ryan found out through a brief message from Dana Elliott, a note that the program's formal onboarding would be delayed by 2 weeks due to a happy development. He responded with a short, genuine congratulation and put down his phone with a feeling he did not immediately have a word for. It was something like hope, but more specific than that. It was the sense that the world sometimes worked correctly. That the right things sometimes happened to the right people. That the woman who had walked into a loud industrial building carrying too much weight, professional, personal, physical, and who had steadied herself against a pillar and borrowed a man's inhaler and thanked him without drama and then come back 2 weeks later to set something right. That woman had her daughter, healthy, on a Thursday in November. And something about that felt right in the deep way that things sometimes feel right. Ryan started the program on a Monday morning in December. The Hartwell Capital offices were in a glass building in downtown Columbus, clean floors, quiet spaces, the smell of good coffee and purpose. He wore the best thing he owned, which turned out to be sufficient. Dana Elliott met him at the reception desk and walked him to an orientation room where 3 other people were already seated, a warehouse logistics supervisor from Cincinnati, a data entry specialist from a Hartwell-owned healthcare company, and a young woman who had been doing facilities management at one of the manufacturing subsidiaries. They looked at each other with the shared recognition of people who had come up through similar paths and were still not entirely certain they were supposed to be here. Ryan sat down, opened the notebook he had brought, and waited. At 9:15, the door opened and Keenan Marsh walked in. She was not visibly pregnant anymore. She had taken 6 weeks, Dana had mentioned, and returned part-time, and she walked with the same unhurried certainty Ryan had first seen on a factory floor in October. She looked tired in the particular way that new parents and executives both look tired, which is to say, still completely present, still completely focused, but with slightly less sleep behind the focus. She looked around the room. Her eye stopped on Ryan for a second. Something passed between them. Nothing dramatic. Nothing emotional. Just a quick acknowledgement. The quiet nod of 2 people who had each done what they were supposed to do when it had not been easy, and who understood that this room was one of the results. She sat at the head of the small table. "Good morning," she said. "I'm going to tell you something that the standard onboarding packet won't tell you." She looked at each of them in turn. "Hartwell Capital invests in companies. But my father used to say that what we're actually investing in is people, and specifically, the question of whether the people running things are the right people." She paused. "After 3 years of trying to be the right person in rooms that weren't sure they wanted me, I've become convinced that the right people are almost never the ones who were handed their position. They're the ones who built their capacity in the spaces where nobody was handing anything to anyone." She looked at Ryan. "And they're the ones who still stop to help a stranger when stopping costs them." The room was quiet. Ryan looked down at his notebook. Then he looked back up and found that, for the first time in a very long time, he was sitting in a room where the weight he had been carrying felt like it was finally, actually, being redistributed. 6 months later, Ryan Cole transferred formally from the Meridian factory floor to the operations analyst track at Hartwell Capital Group. His engineering coursework was fully funded. He finished his degree not in 2.5 years but in 18 months, accelerated by the ability, for the first time, to take a full course load without worrying about the gap between the cost and the margin. His mother started physical therapy. Her knee improved. She stopped working the double shifts that had kept her grinding for years, because Ryan's new salary made the math different. Marcus applied to for architecture programs. He got into 3. Gerald Walsh, after his reassignment, left Meridian within the quarter. Ryan heard this from Tom Baylor in a brief text message and did not feel triumph, just a quiet, considered relief that the floor had one less source of unnecessary weight. Ryan returned to Meridian exactly once, 8 months after the morning in the East Corridor. He was there in his new capacity, conducting a portfolio operations review alongside one of the Hartwell senior analysts. He walked the factory floor in a different kind of hard hat, with a different kind of clipboard, seeing the same machines from a different angle. He stopped at line 3 and watched the quality control inspector, a young woman who moved with the focused quiet of someone who was paying attention when no one was watching, and he thought about what Keenan Marsh's father had apparently said about the people who built things that lasted. He thought about the inhaler. The small, unremarkable object that was always in his pocket because asthma did not ask permission and because being prepared was simply the kind of person Ryan Cole had decided to be. He thought about October, and corridors, and the sound of someone steadying their breath. He walked on. That is the story of Ryan Cole, a man who lived by a rule that no one had to teach him, because it was written somewhere deeper than teaching reaches. He helped because it was right. He told the truth because it was right. He studied in a quiet kitchen after midnight because it was right. And when life finally looked his direction, it recognized something it had been watching all along. Money and power will always have a loud voice in this world. But the people who carry inhalers and stop anyway, and hand them over without asking what they'll get in return, those people are the foundation underneath everything that actually stands. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the right people are not always in the right rooms. But they are always doing the right things, whether anyone is watching or not. Like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.